But what is dururiyat? What are the necessities? And I like to think about Warhuddin Muhammad Rahimahullah, because he talked about the necessities of human life. If you think about people coming out of the institution of bondage, of enslavement, and you think about what they were told are the necessities of life, they would tell you that there's food and clothing and shelter. And this is what they were given and what we have been taught about the necessities of life, but they are not, according to Maqasid al-Sharia, the necessities, walhamdulillah, of human life. The necessities of human life, and I like to think about Imam Warhuddin Muhammad when he talks about community life. What brings the benefits of community life? They're not food, clothing, and shelter. They are the 5 durura from Maqasid al-Sharia. I am of the opinion that Shaitan, Iblis, the devil, is well aware of these 5 durura, and that in the establishment of the institution of slavery, that systematically all 5 of the necessities identified in Maqasid al-Sharia were removed from the enslaved African, in a way that people who lived under the same colonial masters in their countries had some elements removed, but in the American enslavement system, all 5 of the durura from Maqasid al-Sharia were systematically removed. I don't think they were that smart, Raheem. Somebody must have told them, you know, like a Willie Lynch. Look, Willie Lynch wake up in the morning or somebody like that and say, guess what I dreamt about last night? These 5 things. If you remove all 5 of them, you will remove the humanity from the prisoner of war that we call a slave. And I'm telling you, stop calling our ancestors slaves. They were prisoners of war. And because Raheem Jenkins just came in, I want to remind you that slavery and involuntary servitude have been abolished according to the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, with the exception of the punishment of crimes. So for people who are talking about, oh, there's no slavery in America, stop it. The Constitution is clear in its 13th Amendment that the exception is for the punishment of crimes. But looking at these 5 durura, and we're going to talk about them in the second half of the khutbah, I believe that these 5 were removed from the enslaved African so that their transformation from human could be complete. And it won't be until we return all 5 that those who are the descendants of enslaved Africans will ever become completely whole. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and to protect us, and to restore to us, alhamdulillah, the necessities of human life, that Allah might make us successful in this life and in the hereafter. أقول قولي هذا استغفر. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. The 5 durura outlined in Maqasid al-Sharia: Hifdh al-Hayat. These are 5 things that should be preserved. Hifdh al-Hayat, to preserve. I'm going to take some license to preserve your soul, the honor and the dignity of your human existence. hifd al-hayat. In the institution of slavery, what they say? The enslaved African doesn't have a soul. That's why if you kill him, you beat him to death, you don't go to prison. Why? Because it's just like, this is before animal rights. See, now you can't beat your dog because that dog have rights. But back then, you could beat your dog to death. Right? You can whoop a field animal much as you like, but the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed these people you can't even do that. But in the institution of slavery, if you whoop an enslaved African to death, you don't go to prison. Why? Because they don't have a soul. Because the Sharia says, preserve your soul. The next, hifd al-aql. Preserve your intellect. In Maqasid al-Sharia, there is an intellectual legacy. The Quran begins by saying, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. There is an intellectual legacy that the human being is an heir to. They said in America, make it illegal for the enslaved African to learn how to read or write. So you have a Frederick Douglass who learns how to read. It's an act of civil disobedience. And I don't know why in the age of freedom, the average American read less than one book a year. And for those who have been denied for hundreds of years the ability to learn how to read and write, we ought to be reading and writing everything we can read and write. And Dr. Suleiman Yang reminds us, if we do not write our legacy, someone else will write it for us. And so the second in the Maqasid al-Sharia, to preserve your intellect, your intellectual legacy. The third, hifd al-nasr, to preserve nisab, to preserve your lineage. In the institution of American slavery, the enslaved African woman belongs to the master. And their children, they call issue, belong to the master. So if you have a litter of kittens, after the little kittens get to a certain age, you put them in a basket and you put a little sign on them, kittens. Sometimes they have give free kitten. Because the mother of the kitten has no right to her own offspring. Preserve your lineage. The husband is illegal under the system of enslavement for a man and woman to marry. I want you to understand what it means to a people to have lived hundreds of years, denied the institution of family. I mean, what does that do to your head? And then be denied the right to your own children. Then they want to complain now and look at the unwed mothers in the black neighborhood. What? It's only 100 years, maybe 2 generations, they had the ability to marry. And now you have the audacity to turn around and talk about how the black family is dysfunctional. You're the one who made them dysfunctional by removing from them the durura. Hifd al-mal, to preserve your wealth. To think about the power, the capacity of transferring wealth from one generation to the next generation. And you do that for 10 generations. Maybe ma and pa, they didn't look at the new immigrants came to America. Muslims I'm talking about. Came in the 60s and the 70s. They had all of the durura intact. And then when they pass on, they can send their children to college. They bought a home and they can sell their assets. And then you compare them to the descendants of enslaved Africans, prisoners of war. Having not the institutional capacity to transfer wealth from one generation to the next generation. The last in the 5 durur of Maqasid al-Sharia, to preserve your deen. They made it illegal for the enslaved African. And remember, I told you, if Henry Louis Gates' conservative number is right, that means there were 3 million descendants of West Africa who were Muslim, 3 million, who denied the right to practice Islam. They have to practice their deen in secret. Those 5, if we want to make progress, and we want to be clear about not only solving the problem of the descendants of enslaved Africans, but to solve America's problem. You see, because America's problem is not going to be solved, this is Malcolm X 101, until they solve the problem of the American Negro. Because the legacy of having this kind of system affects everyone. I saw the movie Black Panther. And I love Africa. I'm a son of Africa. But I want to be clear. When you see the trauma inside that young man who his mother, we assume is African American, but we never see her. That he's abandoned by his father who's been murdered. Sound familiar? And then his relatives, his distant relatives in Africa, oh, they have governments, they have armies, they have everything. Until there's something replaced of those 5 durura, that young man, his condition, and the depiction of the black American woman in the film, the only African American woman we see in the film is an accomplice to her boyfriend's crime, and when it's inconvenient, he murders her. That's the legacy of black Americans in the film. I won't get too deep into the movies, but I am saying contemporarily there is something is happening in our time now where people are waking up. Even white people are waking up to the injustices that have been done. And we need to look at this from an Islamic lens. Islamically, how can we fix this? And it can only be fixed if we return to the descendants of those people and then to establish the 5 necessities of human life to our people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on us and to guide us. Allahumma ahdina fi man hadayt. Oh Allah, we ask that you protect us. Wa'afina fi man afayt. Oh Allah, wa tawallana fi man tawalayt. Oh Allah, take us as a friend, Ya Allah, as you took Ibrahim alayhi salam as a friend. Ya Allah, help us, walhamdulillah, that we might establish iqamatu deen, Ya Allah, as we are worshiping today for the first Jumah in a long time at the law school, alhamdulillah, that you help us to establish the remembrance of Allah wherever we are. Oh Allah, help us to establish and to return, alhamdulillah, the maqasid al-sharia that will bring beauty, alhamdulillah, and convenience and the necessities of life to our people. Ya Allah, we ask that you forgive us of our sins, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, that you provide for us every facility. رَبَّنَا أَتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسْنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسْنَةً وَقِينَا عَذَابِ النَّارِ حِنَّ جَنَّةَ مَا أَبْرَارٍ. Ya Allah, give us the reward of your forgiveness and your Jannah without any interrogation, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, that we might taste, alhamdulillah, the hawd of Rasulullah and the sweetness of your paradise forever. Oh Allah, we ask for your mercy and your peace on the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, and on his family and on his companions, and all of the Anbiya, Ya Allah, those who follow the way of your haqq, Ya Allah, until the day of judgment. Ameen. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر لكم. أقم صلاة.